I'm Laurie, I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Laurie.
And I'm a talker, so I am timing myself. Okay. I got clean when I was 21 years old. And I was probably the youngest person in the room at the time. Well, I was the youngest person in the room. I was told that when I went to that meeting that everybody would want to hold my hand and give me a hug, and they would say the Lord's Prayer. And I didn't know the Lord's Prayer, so I wondered if I could go. And they said, "Yeah, you don't have to say it, and you don't have to say anything if you don't want to." And so I was happy to be there. Normally, in the past, when I've shared about my sobriety and coming into the program and that type of thing, I usually start, with what it used to be like. And what I find is that I spend a lot of time telling sort of jokes because it was pretty bad, and I'd rather make it sound kind of good, right? I mean, we all know how bad it was. I can only speak for myself. So now what I do is I start from what it's like now. And what I can tell you about what it's like now is I have a freaking awesome job that I never would have dreamed of. I thought I would die at a young age. I lived like I was going to die at a young age. I thought I would die and leave a good-looking corpse because that's what we were told, and that's not what happened. I've been sober for what seems like longer than I used. Let's put it that way. So I spent the majority of my life in sobriety, not necessarily always in the program. I came back into the rooms probably around 2010. Before that, I was out of the rooms for about 10 years. I didn't use, but I might as well have. I was pretty raw, and my life was dark. Some good things happened then, some bad things. But what I've learned since I came back into the rooms was that I came back in the rooms mostly because there was somebody who I knew who wanted to get sober, and I wanted to be a sponsor, this person's sponsor, and I knew I couldn't sponsor without having a sponsor, because that's what I've been told when I came in the rooms. And so I came in and I found a sponsor. I thought I had to have someone who had more time than me. And at that point, that was hard, and I really had, I think, a big chip on my shoulder around how much time I had, because I thought that was really important. And what I've since come to find out is that it's really not important at all. It doesn't mean what it used to mean to me. I've found that my sobriety does not rely on what I do over the long term as much as what I'm doing right now. For me, that has been probably the biggest lesson. So I started coming back to meetings, and I was going to Saturday Promises, which is on Saturdays, surprisingly enough, at 9:00. And it used to be down in Madison Park. And the way that it used to be set up was there was a stage that sort of had a big table on it. And then there was like where the rest of the folks sat, and the chairs, and they would set up rows and rows of chairs. So when I started out in that meeting, I came in, I didn't know anybody, and I wasn't going to sit up with everybody else where the table was. So I sat way, way in the back. And the joke they would tell me was that by the time I stopped using that group as my home group, I was sitting at the table, at the end of the table, and talking all the time. But when I went to those meetings, and again, somebody reached out to me. I was at work, and somebody said something about higher power, and I texted them, and I said, "Are you a friend of Bill's?" And she said, "Yeah, and you should come to this Saturday morning meeting." I haven't been to meetings in a really long time. I got sober in upstate New York, and I was there for about 15 years, and I pretty much had a group of folks that I hung out with. I had a community there, And in 1997, I moved to Boulder, Colorado, and pretty much everybody I felt like dropped me. I took it really personal. I didn't get involved in the program, and I didn't even go to a meeting, like one meeting. And that was back in the day, right? So we didn't have cell phones. Long distance cost a lot of money. Nobody flew anywhere, and nobody wrote letters either. So of course, I didn't spend my money on calling anybody, and I didn't fly anywhere. And I also didn't write letters. So I totally lost touch with everybody. And one thing that had been told to me from the very beginning was that if I stopped going to meetings, I was going to drink. And it kind of pissed me off. So I decided that I wasn't going to go to meetings, but I wasn't going to drink. And I found out, I think maybe, well, what I can tell you is that when I don't go to meetings, I probably should have had a drink. I would have been happier. It was pretty bad. I tried to do what I thought was 10th step, which basically was I owned my side of the street, which meant I could tell you how I was right and you were wrong. I was miserable. Then I came here. I still didn't go to meetings for a while. Met up with this person who told me to go to Saturday Promises. So I did that. I immediately got a sponsor who turned out to be more of a friend. And I started getting involved in service because I needed something to do. So we used to take a meeting up to Thunderbird Residential on Sunday nights. And so I became the person who got groups of folks together to go up there. And then we also would answer phones here once a month. And I did that, I think maybe for a year, maybe a couple years. And then I decided I needed to have, meanwhile, that sponsee who I wanted to sponsor stopped coming to meetings after doing a 4-step and a 5th step. I didn't take it personally. And then I decided that I needed a new home group. I started going to meetings. I started hanging out with people from the program. I started to actually have community. And I got a new sponsor because I actually polled a bunch of people. It seemed like I spent more time asking people who I should ask to be my sponsor than I had, asking about whether or not I should get married to my wife. So I finally figured I should just pick somebody. And so Judith has been my sponsor ever since then. We went through the steps at least once together, partially another time or two. And I started getting sponsees and going through the steps with them as well. At a certain point, I decided that I needed to leave my home group, and I went on to another home group. And what I found is in AA, I guess I thought for a long time that people in AA were like better than everybody else, right? Because we were working a program and we had our shit together. I don't know what I was thinking, but anyway, and what I now understand is that AA is just, for me, this is my higher power. This fellowship is my higher power. I struggled with the big book when I first came in. I don't struggle with it as much anymore because I've read a lot about the history and I understand where it's coming from now, and I can get past the he's and hims and to the wife. Not that I don't still have resentment, but I'm just saying. And it's comfortable for me now. There's parts of it that really speak to me. But what I found was in the beginning, I had to come up with some idea of like a higher power because I didn't believe in God. And they used to say a lot of times then they would say, you could use a doorknob if for your higher power. I thought that was pretty stupid. So I started to think around, this was like in the 80s, right? So HIV, everybody was dying, people in Biafra, there was all kinds of stuff happening, and I couldn't understand it. I was young, I didn't get it. And someone talked to me about lemmings. And I don't know if you know about lemmings, but like they're this rodent, and when there get to be a lot of them, right, supposedly they go and run off cliffs and stuff and kill off part of their population so that all the rest of the lemmings can live. And that supposed to speak to the balance of life. I know but to me, that made sense, right? There was a little light that went off for me. It made sense to me that there needed to be balance in the universe, and that things like that happen. It was like ants dying or something. We're just a part of all of it. But then recently, within this past year, I was speaking at a meeting, and right before the meeting, and it was going to be about higher power stuff. And right before the meeting, I looked up balance in nature. And I read this National Geographic article, and it talked about how balance in nature is basically bullshit. It doesn't exist. It's actually, nature is always in flux. It's never in balance. It's always moving. And then I didn't know what I was going to talk about. So I just talked about how pissed off I was that now I had to find a new higher power. But it was really easy, because in that meeting, and also in all the meetings that have followed, I found that my higher power is the folks that are here. I know that when I come here, if I'm going through a hard time, or even if I'm like ecstatic about everything that's happening, that I can share that with you, and I can get back, not advice, but people sharing their experience, strength, and hope with me. And it makes a big difference. I don't have that from a lot of other people. I'm able to allow people from the program to share that with me, and I feel very, very lucky. Being involved in the program has changed my life. I don't believe that I would be here today if it wasn't for the program. And I know that my sister wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the program either, because she could reach out to me when she was struggling. I think I'm at the end of my 15 minutes. What I will say, I got 3, okay. What I will say is, for me, the reason I got clean was because alcohol and drugs stopped working for me. They worked for me for what I thought was a really long time at the time. I didn't realize that I was using it as a tool, but when it stopped working for me, I didn't have anything in between me and the rest of the world, and I didn't know what to do. I was a control freak, although I did not see it that way. I drank. It was sort of like an alchemy for me, the way I drank. I could drink enough to get drunk, and then I would be able to drive everybody home. I was always the designated driver. And I started to lose control of that. I didn't know if I drank a beer, if I would be wasted, or I could drink a case of beer and I would still be sober. I had no idea. And I started getting sick when I drank, and that was not something that I had been blessed with before. The last drink I had up to this point was after I had been haranguing somebody in the bar, which was my home. Basically, I did my homework there. I watched Dynasty there, just to tell you what year it was. I was haranguing somebody in the bar, and they actually called a cab to get away from me. And I was pretty embarrassed when I went back into the bar, and so I bought a round for everybody. It wasn't hard to do. There were about maybe 4 or 5 people there. And I picked up my beer, and I started chugging it down, and it was like a light went off. And this sounds stupid, but to me, I made the connection between alcohol and changing the way I felt. And don't know why it's making me tear up, but I hadn't made that connection. And once I made that connection, I was able to connect with everybody in the rooms. And that was the beginning of me getting clean. I've often wished that I had finished the rest of that beer, but I did not. I would say I hadn't ever turned back. That's not true. I was away from the rooms for 10 years at least. But once I got back here, I felt like I hadn't left at all. I was accepted. People welcome me with open arms. And so I try to pay that forward as often as I can. Thanks. Glad to be here.